There have been no bids for offshore wind in the government auction. What's this all about? Let's read into it more from the BBC, guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with an article from the BBC with the headline that no bids for offshore wind in the government's auction. No new offshore wind project contracts have been bought by developers at a key government auction, dealing a blow to the UK's renewable power strategy. Now, before we go further into this, I think this is also important to stress that this British government, and I could be wrong on this, I'm pretty sure that they actually made it more it costs more in order to build renewables they tax some of the renewable energies here in the UK as opposed to the fossil fuels and gas, which is absolutely insane. But I'm pretty sure they've done some kind of tax on there before. I'm sure I've read a report somewhere on that. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below, but I'm pretty sure they've made it more difficult for renewable power strategies to come into the UK. I'm sure that's the case, but let's read more into this to give us a better understanding of it. So, results show no bids for new offshore wind farms, but there were deals for solar, tidal and onshore wind projects. Okay, so there was deals for solar, tidal and onshore wind projects, but not for wind farms specifically here. Firms have argued that the price set for electricity generated was too low to make offshore wind project viable. The government said a global rise in inflation impacted supply chains and presented challenges for projects. It is said that while offshore and floating offshore wind projects did not feature on the agreed deal list, the outcomes was in line with similar results in countries including Germany and Spain. The Department of Energy Security and Net Zero said significant numbers of solar power, onshore wind, tidal energy schemes, and for the first time, geothermal projects, which uses heat from the ground to generate power, had been awarded funding. But the lack of offshore wind will be a blow to the pledge to deliver 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 compared with the 14 gigawatts that we have today. Renewable energy groups have said that alternative renewable projects such as solar cannot do the heavy lifting in generating the power that offshore wind does. We are an island. Offshore wind should be a priority. Yes, solar is we don't have as much sun as other nations around the world, given our pinpoint on the planet. Yes, we do get solar, but I do agree that wind is far more a reliable source of energy than solar, in my opinion, based on our geography, really. As someone who's pretty much lived and born here, I would say wind is a more reliable source of energy. And it says here, obviously, that we are supposed to be increasing that by 2030 as well. So that's not a good sign as well, yet, to be honest. The technology has been described as a jewel in the UK's renewable energy crown, but firms have been hit by higher costs for buildings for offshore wind farms, with materials such as steel and labour being more expensive. Yeah, this is a result of Brexit, not just the case of cost of living crisis and things going on around the world, but not being able to get materials or harder, shall we say, more expensive, more paperwork to get certain materials from the EU. That will also play a factor in that. The UK is a world leader in offshore wind and is home to the world's 4 largest farms, supporting tens of thousands of jobs, which provide 13.8% of the UK's electricity generation last year, according to the government statistics. The government's annual auction invites companies to bid to develop the renewable energy projects and contracts to supply the UK grid with electricity. The scheme ensures the project will receive a guaranteed price from the government for having electricity they will generate. It is hoped that it will enable companies to have the confidence to invest. The deal, called the Contract of Difference, the CFD, means that if electricity prices are above the price set, the company pays the excess back to energy suppliers, which should help cut bills. If prices fall below the guaranteed price, the energy suppliers and customers and customers paid the company the difference. It was hoped offshore wind in the latest rounds would help generate 5 gigawatts of power, enough to run 5 million homes, but wind farm builders have warned for months that the government was not taking into account how much the cost of developing them had soared. Industry insiders told the BBC that £44 per megawatt hour price floor set for the latest auction fails to take account of the higher cost. So let's just have a quick look at this graph here. So here, this is offshore wind growing importance. So the electricity generated from renewable sources in the UK gigawatts. This is a source from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero that supports here. So you got here waste, biofuel, hydro, solar, onshore wind and offshore wind here. And we can see it's come from 2000 to 2010. And as you can see, we have increased it over the last 20 years or so. Both Labour and Conservatives in power have increased that. I think, yeah, I mean, you've got to say here, especially in the last 10 years, from when the coalition took over to the Conservatives took over, we have seen an increase there in the number of offshore and offshore wind, as well as biofuel. There has been a massive increase in all those sorts of energy. So you have to give credit where credit is due there to the Conservative governments that have done that, because that has occurred there. Yes, the projects and lines were in place with Labour, but the Conservatives could have easily had turned around and not carried on these projects. So, but it is still more investment is of course still needed. Lost opportunity. Keith Anderson, Chief Executive of Scottish Power, said the outcome of the auction was a multi-billion pound lost opportunity to deliver low-cost energy for consumers in a wake-up call for the government. He said the contracts have been recognised globally as a linchpin of the UK's offshore success, but says the economics simply did not stand up to this time around. We need to get back on track and consider how we unlock the billions of investment in what is still one of the cheapest ways to generate power and meet the UK's long-term offshore wind ambitions for the future, he added. I 100% agree. As I've said, like, we are an island. It speaks for itself to have more wind power. Alistair Phillips Davis, Chief Executive of SSE, is currently building the world's largest offshore wind farm, said offshore wind power has a much cheaper energy source, about half the price compared with other sources, including fossil fuels. He told the BBC's Today programme that while the UK needed to build more wind farms for this particular auction, and unfortunately the prices were just set too low for electricity generated to make investment viable. On Friday, wholesale gas prices in the UK rose about 10% after strike action kicked off at two major liquefied gas giants, LNG facilities in Australia. Ed Miliband, the Labour Shadow Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary, said the rest of the auction had been an absolute disaster for Britain, but it should have been avoidable. He argued the government have been warned by the industry that unless they adjust the auction prices, this would happen. They should be hanging their heads in shame, he told the BBC Today programme. While there were no bids for offshore contracts, the government said a total of 95 clean energy projects had secured funding of £227 million, up from 93 of the previous auctions, securing enough power to the equivalent of 2 million homes. Energy and Climate Change Minister Graham Stewart said the government was delighted that the auction had seen a round of record number of successful projects access solar, onshore wind, tidal power, and for the first time geothermal. He added that offshore wind was central to our ambitions to decarbonise our electricity supply, and said the government would work with industry to make sure we retain our global leadership in its vital technology. Yeah, we obviously need to develop more. I think that's pretty clear, guys. Here, wind, as I've said already, guys. Wind. I prefer offshore to onshore wind, but obviously, just because of the landmass, I think, in terms of looking after the green land, and also considering the size of our island, I just think there's more space to do it offshore. Obviously, understandably, residents, especially when certain spaces are out, I think if you do it further enough away from the beaches and the coast, it doesn't really affect too much. And I'm saying that coming from someone who doesn't even have a home on the beaches and shore, so what do I know? But that's my personal preference. I think it's better more offshore wind farms out on the sea rather than on land in the UK, I think, is what we needed. But the fact that they're not making it easy for the government, is not making it easy for these companies to invest into them, it doesn't help us at all either. So that is not good for us, to say the least. But yes, we need more investment, that is for sure, and we need to encourage it more, as much more as possible. Well, what do you guys make of this? Make of the offshore wind? Let me know down in the comments below. I was surprised by the graph, surprised by how much actually investment has been made, because you can see that from the graph that we looked at earlier, you can see that it has changed over the last 10 years. So there is that. So the Conservatives didn't have to do that. Yes, of course, yes, more needs to be done. We know that. We agree with that. But give credit where credit is due, guys, I would say, on that part. But let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe as always. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.